Hello and welcome to Stellar Strategy Gaming. Today we will be discussing how to make combat in D&D more engaging and just generally more fun as a result of that. We're going to start it off with some of Ben's thoughts, and I'll likely mostly be reacting to these, as while I like D&D combat, I actually prefer to avoid it altogether most of the time.
And you know what? A few years ago, I would have said you're crazy for wanting to avoid D&D combat. It's the most fun part of the game. And when it's done right, I'm still going to say it can be. But when it goes wrong, you can turn into a really tedious situation where everybody is stationary on the board or even in the theater of the mind if you're doing it that way. And you're just kind of repeatedly rolling dice to see what hits and waiting for it to be over. Now, there are a few things that specifically create this problem. Biggest one I would say is probably the way disengaging and opportunity attacks work. It's just not necessarily conducive to moving around during combat. I'm actually not here to rail against how opportunity attacks work. Lindy Beige did do a pretty good video about why he didn't think that was a sensible mechanic.
Link below.
I disagree. So there are a few things you can do mechanically. One of them is you can do things that switch the way opportunity attacks work. For example, if you're having a nautical campaign, you could have a situation where something happens, if there's a fight on the boat, that causes the deck to pitch. Now everybody has to make a dexterity save, and if they don't, they roll 1d6 feet. This is allies and enemies. So now the board is reset, and now the players get to reset. Another option is you could set your players and the enemies up to do reactions. There are a lot of reaction, such as Riposte, which the Battlemaster Fighter does, which is a totally legitimate and damaging action, as well as Hellish Rebuke. So if your enemy has used Hellish Rebuke, well, that person's burned their reaction for the round. Now your players are free to move around them, and you're not taking anything away from the game. It doesn't necessarily make it easier. One of your players just got Hellish Rebuked.
Yes. My thoughts on the matter are also that you should never have just one enemy on the board. That innately feeds into the issue of your players being stationary, and figuring out how you're going to move to get certain advantages or how you're going to move to avoid attacks is one of the most engaging things you can do. In combat, when I am just sitting there going, yes, I cast Blight for the 45th time against the big bad, I'm not really having fun. Now, when the big bad is clearly about to launch some massive energy beam my way or something, and I have a chance to move 5 feet out of the way, that's going to get my attention a little more. And in fact, I'm going to take inspiration from one of my favorite games of all time to inspire a theoretical encounter, which is in the game Other Side. There is a big bad boss, the Plague Doctor, who summons these little minions who boost his armor stat, which means you cannot touch him until you kill all of his minions, because the status effect for the armor ends when they die. You're probably thinking, wait, but you can't have video game mechanics in D&D, to which you're wrong, because most video games were modeled after older D&D forms. So what you do in D&D is have 3 or 4 little guys running around, maybe Nothics running around a Lich or something, or giving him +3 armor class, because that's still going to be enough for a mid-level party to struggle to hit him at all. And so that means that you have to move around to follow these little guys, you have to move around to avoid the boss, who is still an active player at this time, and it also means that you have to fight just a little bit of an extra monster, and then you can fight the Lich. So even if the combat against the Lich then becomes stationary, you will still have had a very fun beginning to the session, which, in my opinion, that sort of fun can carry you throughout the rest of it.
And this brings in a larger point that I wanted to get to, is that one of the things that can make combat a lot more interesting is if the players have more problems than just the enemy in front of them. I ran a campaign one time where it was a seafaring campaign. The party noticed that the ship was starting to list to one side, and what they discovered was that there was a leak in the hull. Now, a player could have the mend cantrip, which would fix something like that, so you have to either make sure that your players don't have that, or have some sort of a plan for if they do. Point is, though, what they discovered was that some Sahagwin, this was their mode of attack. They would punch a hole in the hull of the ship, and then when the ship sinks, ship is vulnerable. So, players notice the ship is leaking. They're trying desperately to get to port. The Sahagwin notice this is happening, and the Sahagwin attack. So now the players have more than one problem. They were bailing water in order to keep the ship from sinking. Now, some number of them have to go deal with the attacking Sahagwin. Every player who's fighting is not bailing water. So for every player who is devoted to defending them from the attacking sea monsters, the ship is now sinking faster. There's many variations of this you can do that change up both where people are on the map and just generally what's happening. One mechanic I haven't seen used a whole lot that could be really interesting is if your players are, for example, defending a city that's being besieged. So you've got your players, shooting arrows, throwing spears, casting spells off the wall, and here's a catapult stone that just hits somebody randomly. I don't care about your AC at that point. It's a catapult stone. It is hitting you. You can use your uncanny dodge to minimize the damage. And let's say that knocks that player off the wall. So now the person who's been knocked off the wall, that's an open spot on the wall that enemies can be climbing up. That means that the board is now reset. And plus your other remaining players are wondering, where's that catapult stone going to land next? And it creates an opportunity for your players to engage. Like, okay, can I look and see what this person's doing? Fine, make an insight check. It doesn't have to be your action. I'll give it to you for free. But make an insight check to where the stone is going to hit. And you might be saying, like, okay, well, your wizard, your sorcerer, your whatever might be looking for, is there a way I can damage the catapult from where I am to where it can't continue to fire? It makes it more than just, as you say, I cast Fireball 60 times because I'm multi-class sorcerer in some way that allows me to do that.
Sorcerer's man. Yes, the other thing is, even if you've taken all of our advice up until now, you're probably still going, wait, but combat is lulling a bit. And that is because you're still spending an hour rolling dice in reality. It's the thing which I have always hated about D&D the most is excessive dice rolling, and it will be better with some DMs than others. That we cannot help you with. You will just have to figure out what your DM likes to do, and then figure out how to promptly avoid whatever they like to do. But the best way, in my opinion, to solve the dice rolling problem is, in the player's handbook, when you choose your class, you get a default class HP number you can choose when you level up. So I think for sorcerer it's a D8, I want to say, and you can choose like a 5 to add to your health pool instead of rolling the dice every time. Why not have something like that for damage? Because, to use an earlier example of Blight, I think that's 6d6 or 6d8. That takes like at least a solid 2 or 3 minutes to roll all of those dice. And then because no one who plays D&D is particularly good at math, it then takes another 3 or 4 minutes to add up all your modifiers and actually add those numbers together. So instead, just make it, 6d8.
Did you count for your bardic inspiration?
I hate you. So instead, just make it so that 6d8, you can choose to have each of those d8s do 4 damage. It's a very good way to average things out. My other recommendation for the dice situation is, to some extent, you can actually just skip it, just in my opinion. Especially, like, if the big bad's getting pushed into fire, don't stop everything to do the math and the arithmetic on how much damage is being dealt while he's standing in fire or whatever. And in minor encounters, don't feel stressed about the dice rolls either. The only time, in my opinion, when you really have to be rolling dice is either when you're a low-level player, because that means that every single kill is going to be meaning so much more to the players, or when you're very high-level and you've taken out a big bad, especially a lich, for example. I want to roll the dice when I'm fighting a lich, and I know that this is going to be the final blow, because that just feels so much more epic. But the rest of the time, like, if you're fighting 4 dwarfs in a cave at level 3, no one cares about how much damage you're doing. That came up pretty recently in a campaign Ben was doing where you just had me skip the dice roll for good reason.
Yes. That's actually a very good reason to do the thing where when you crit, you just do max damage rather than rolling multiple dice. Because, like, if you're a rogue using sneak attack and you crit, I've talked about it on this channel before, I had a fighter rogue multi-class that his whole thing was that he constantly critted, so you'd be rolling dice forever. And it was just a waste of time.
Did you add the luck feat to that?
Of course I did. What kind of schmuck would I be if I didn't add the luck feat to this?
And then you also get the luck dagger to add another dice. And then
Yeah, pretty much. Well, we hope this has been interesting and informative. We thank you so much for watching. Like, share, comment, subscribe. What are your thoughts? What makes combat fun for you? We will look forward